All right, we're moving into the top 5 albums now. This is where it starts getting really, really special, really, really emotional, as if it wasn't already up until now. Number 5, we have Kids See Ghosts. This is the Kid Cudi and Kanye collaborative album. One of the 5 that he released this year, one of the 5 that he announced, and of the ones he announced, this was one that I don't know. I was like pretty sure it would be bad. I was like pretty sure it was gonna tank, and its very existence made me lose faith in the whole 5 album project. Just being real with you here. I've never been a big Kid Cudi fan. I've always found him kind of corny and annoying. Um, and, I feel bad that he went through what he did. I think it's always very moving and inspirational when an artist opens up about their depression and about their struggles and such. And I really think it's great that he was able to share that so intimately with so many of his fans and some of his previous albums. And I wished for his success, but it just never did anything for me. I just don't want to come across as callous, so I had to say all of that. But in this album, he completely got me. He boomed me. He was able to take the story of his depression and significantly in this album the story of his recovery, his reemergence, and make it really truly beautiful and inspirational for me. And it goes the same for Kanye. Kanye, who had a really really rough 2018, who went pretty out there after he stopped taking his antipsychotic medication. Made a lot of very stupid tweets talking about a lot of very stupid things. Basically, a really bad combination of his confidence, his ego, which is so essential to his music making quality, which is something that I like best about him, unfortunately was now combined with an area where he had no idea what he was talking about. And he said some things that will set back a large group of people's understanding of the political reality of America by quite a bit. So yeah, all of that very disappointing, very very disappointing. And the first album I listened to out of this 2018 Kanye quintilogy, Yay, I was also kind of disappointed with. There was some moments on it that I thought were fantastic, but overall I was like, this is one of his weakest albums. Probably his weakest album. The songs he released outside of albums, Lift Yourself, which is like a bizarre joke. I kind of love it, but it is just a joke, and it really kind of felt like Kanye was just giving up. And then the People versus Ye, which again, it's like it's clear that Kanye just has no idea what he's talking about. um, that he just does not understand the falsehood of the things he's saying, and is operating totally on an emotional level. And it just felt terrible. It really felt terrible being a Kanye fan last year, and feeling all of these things that other people had always hated him for. His arrogance, his overconfidence, his willingness to say anything at any time, his contrarianism, all of those things that always got him so much negative attention, but that I had defended, that I had said, no, this is essential to how he is, this is essential to how he makes music. All of those things just being thrown back in my face. But with this album, it felt good again. It felt good again. It really did. I don't think it justifies what Kanye did. I don't think it's gonna completely 180 me on how I feel about his year in general. Nor, of course, does it make me at all sympathetic or agreeing with the sort of stances he's taking. But the music itself is damn good, and it really restored a lot of faith in him as an artist. Um, it's like explosive in its multi-genreness. Its production quality is, of course, off the charts, but it feels a little different than most Kanye production. It kind of feels a little more disjointed, a little more not necessarily like rushed, but it kind of is missing some of the layers that Kanye usually adds. But I think it uses this to great effect. It's like very raw, it's very immediate and visceral. Things aren't like quoted in like layers of sound that, although gorgeous and compelling to listen to, sometimes detract away from just how insane and genius the raw ideas actually are. And we got quite a lot of this on T-Lop, I thought, especially the early versions of T-Lop. A lot of this kind of feeling of rawness and incompleteness. Um, and here I think it really exposes something pretty critical, because so much of this album is about the creative process, is about kind of struggling between mental illness and creativity. So hearing an album that feels like it shows you not just the end result of someone's creative process, but kind of like a slice of it, is really fascinating, really compelling, moving stuff. Like if you kind of think about this album in the most abstract, if you remove the cultural context around Kanye and Cudi, I'm saying a lot of K sounds, um, and you just sort of see it as this living document on how to create art, on the process of creating art. I think it can be very compelling and inspirational, for anyone. Yeah, I don't know. I think there's some moments on this album where it's like you can just see the crystallization of the idea itself. Um, like on the final track, which almost has this prototype type name of Cudi Montage, because it uses a recording from Montage of Heck, which is Kurt Cobain's home demos. Um, and it has like a strong use of that sample. It's almost like overly strong for Kanye. That normally these things would kind of be mixed back in a little more. It would be like mastered with more things going on. But the rawness of it is just so unique and so compelling and so beautiful. And the message, mostly expressed through Cudi's lyrics, of emerging from darkness, emerging from depression, feeling like yourself again, feeling like you're capable of making things again, that comes through on so many tracks. In usually like a very religious sense, that track I just mentioned, the hook is, Lord, shine your light on me, save me, please, which may or may not resonate with you. But it has like a hugeness to it. It has a gravity to it where you really do believe that he was at the edge. He was like one step from the edge, and yet he was able to turn himself around and to thrive creatively. Yeah, I don't know. I can't praise this album enough. Um, it feels like, I don't know, like if this is the actual direction Kanye is going, I still think perhaps his best years are ahead of him. If he's able to take this freshness of ideas, this immediacy and this rawness of sound, and to continue this sort of inspirational story he's telling of redemption and coming towards the light, it feels like a very bright future for hip hop music. On the other hand, Kanye could go in like 5 other directions, all equally suggested this year. Some of those are not as good, so we'll see, we'll see. But this is not even my #1 Kanye-related album. That would be this, Teyana Taylor's KTSE, Keep That Same Energy. Another Kanye 7-track album that he announced all at the same time. This one, my expectations were very low because I barely knew who Teyana Taylor was. I don't think I'd listened to any of her solo music. I only knew her from features. And I thought, well, this is probably going to be the easy one, I guess. This is going to be the one that Kanye just kind of knocks out because, she's a good singer. It's easy to produce a good, well, not easy, but it's, you know what you're trying to do when you're producing a good singer. You're trying to bring out the quality of her voice. I thought, I could tell what it was going to be like. And to some extent, I was right. A lot of it is around just the beauty of her voice and kind of immersing it into different musical scenarios. But at the same time, I never could have imagined just how much I would love this album. It's just so light and free and beautiful in its lyrical themes. Again, like a very inspirational story. This one not coming from a place of darkness or manicness or anything like that, but just the story of her living, of her relationships, of her and her children, her and her husband. It's almost painfully innocent at points. There's a song near the middle called Three Way, which is kind of like a lush, sexy ballad. And it's talking about just how taboo and how like terrifying but exciting and thrilling it is for her to have a three-way. It's like, well, a three-way, that's it. Yeah, I don't know. Like, it just sort of has this purity to it. Um, Not that I'm trying to be condescending towards Teyana Taylor, but it really seems to speak from a place of just earnestness about making sincere, inspirational, beautiful music. The centerpiece track, at least in my mind, is Rose in Harlem, which really, like I kind of predicted, this is more minimal on the Kanye-ness of the production. It's like really good beats, really good grooves, all of that stuff, great sample usage. But I think only on A Rose in Harlem, and then not as effectively on the final track, does the real cinematic quality of Kanye's work come out. Just the structure of that song, the way it moves into new beats through the chorus, the repeating of the sample and stuff. Oh man, I don't know. It's mind blowing. How good that song is. The last track, like I alluded to, is a definite swing for the bleachers in a totally opposite direction to everything else on the album. And it's funny to me. It almost has a nice comedic finish that just makes me all the more eager to go back and listen to the album again because it ends on like such a light note that you're hearing about how she wants to be a household brand. I don't know, I can't even begin to describe that song. And then as soon as you're done, you want to go right back to those gorgeous sliding violin tones, so reminiscent of Late Registration and I Got a Man but Ain't Got No Manners. It's such an awesome opening. And just the way the beat comes in on all of these songs, it's so warm, it's so rich. um, I remember just like coming home from work and putting on this album and just dancing around my apartment, just feeling so much joy, like all of the weight just dissolving from my life. Really, really wonderful album. I'm so glad she finally put something out. She even alludes to how long she's been waiting to make an album on this album, um, and basically says like, "It's none of your business. I'm just doing me." And this whole time she was just doing her, and now she's put out this fantastic CD. I really hope there's more coming soon. It's great. Okay. This is the first full length by Serpent with Feet, who released the Blisters EP. We talked about it in last year's list. A really gorgeously sad. Oh wait, no, that was 2016, wasn't it? It was the 2016 list we talked about it. A really, really, yeah, gorgeous, lush. I've been saying that word a lot, probably because of the Snail Mail album. But it's like the most beautiful, purely sad thing I had ever heard, I think. There was no real abrasiveness in it. There was no aggressiveness in it. It was just pure, sorrowful lamentations. And when the full length was coming out, I was like a little hesitant. I was a little worried because I knew the tonal energy of Blisters could not be sustained for an entire album. And I was right. And this album actually shows in a really exciting way all of the potential and the range that Serpent with Feet actually has with his voice and his music. The EP was like entirely produced by the Hacks and Cloak, which is like a dark ambient band. And I tied their kind of ominous, dreadful music so intensely with his voice. And yet this album shows me that like, no, obviously he can do more than that. He can do a lot more than that. Um, Lyrically, it's still quite sad. It's still all the lamentations of him and his ex-lover, and how he pines for him, and how he does all of these sometimes obsessive, like admittedly obsessive things towards him, um, and yet it doesn't take itself too seriously ever. There's there's a lot of lines that are like really funny. I don't want to be small, small sad. I want to be big, big sad. I want to make a pageantry of my grief. Like he's very, very self-aware in just how indulgent and over the top all of this music is. But then, like, okay, so like thematically it's serious. Then lyrically it's all over the map. Sometimes very funny. And then musically, it's just consistently stunning. The opening track, Whisper, probably still my favorite track on the album, has this sense of drama in the way that it continually manipulates his voice, and continually raises it in and out of the mixing. Um, Other tracks have like elements of Gregorian type chant, or something like a good example, or kind of like more like folksy sort of music, like things that are more suitable for strumming on an acoustic guitar. Um, it's it's shocking just how diverse, and yet how everything in this album is so rich. Again, I'm just in awe of the talent involved in doing such a thing. The confidence it must take to go to so many different places and know that they're all going to sound good, and that in the end that they're all going to unite somehow in some undescribable level, aesthetically and thematically. Yeah, really impressed with this. Such an amazing, unique musician. I really can't wait to see what he does next. Speaking of another amazing, unique musician, at number 2, we have Some Rap Songs by Earl Sweatshirt. This is a musician who kind of went in the opposite direction, I guess, of Serpent with Feet. He started off very humorous and irreverent way back in his earliest work with Odd Future, and then displayed like a great growth and maturity, kind of taking himself more seriously, kind of going to more poetic, contemplative places on Doris, and then got really, really depressed, like really, really bitterly, emptily, coldly depressed. And that was his album, I Don't Like Shit, I Don't Go Outside. A more aptly titled album I cannot think of, along with the extended solo songs, Solace. I don't know why I call it a solo song. I was about to call it a single, but it's not a single, so I called it a solo song. Solace, yeah, also really intensely sad and depressing. It just sort of felt like he had emptied himself out, that a lot of things that we had both observed in his music, things that he had like told us over tracks, and then a whole world of personal problems that I'm sure we would not even begin to speculate on, had basically just become too much for him to bear. And I kind of felt that was it, that he was depressed, and that he was going to either just stop making music or release increasingly depressing music. And honestly, I was pretty excited for that. I was like, this could be really good. But I felt bad for him too. This is an artist that I've followed since he was in his late teens, that rose from when Odd Future was like a very niche underground thing to just a gigantic cultural force, and seeing him struggle with that success and yet also cherish it and use it to his advantage, like, man, it was like intense. It was intense to see him that depressed. I felt like I genuinely knew him as a person, and I felt for him in a way that felt very intimate and personal. Okay, all of this is to say that Some Rap Songs, as an emergence and reassertion of Earl Sweatshirt as a dynamic, forward-thinking creative artist, so beautiful to witness. Like he's like back. He feels good again. And a lot of the album is about that. It's about being at that point where just nothing is good for you, nothing matters, nothing will make you happy, and finding something new, finding a fresh way to look at things, finding a road to recovery. Um, and accordingly, the music on this album is very different than anything he's done before, and very different than anything anyone has done before. He's hanging out with a lot of New York rappers that are they're kind of putting together a new scene, one that I will admittedly admit, huh? One that I'll admit that I really did not know about at all until this album, with guys like Mike and Navy Blue that appear on here. It's very hard to describe what it is. It feels super old school in its kind of accumulated black cultural heritage that goes into it. Elements of jazz, blues, spoken word poetry, revolutionary poetry, um, kind of like going all the way back to, in my mind, the kind of archetypical image of like an African poet. All of these things bringing to bear with like very fresh lo-fi production, things being emphasized that I don't think I'd ever thought to emphasize in rap before. Like just kind of the residual echoes of snare hits and such constituting major parts of the beat. Things that harken back to kind of like that really old school bedroom boom bap sort of sound, like when the drum machines weren't so good and it kicked really raw, but then mixed and integrated with all of this like really virtuoso type music, and really confident, compelling performances from all the rappers, in such a way that I don't know, it feels like he's having fun. Like it just really feels like he had so much fun making this album. I don't even really want to try to touch on some of the greater lyrical themes. A lot of it has to do with like his family, which of course is much too personal for me to ever try to speculate on. Um, well, I mean, I could try, but I wouldn't feel good about it. Or is so culturally rooted in the experience of being black in America that again, it just doesn't seem like it would work if I tried to make any proclamations about that. So I would instead encourage you to just read up on the album, listen to it while reading the lyrics. I think that's an amazing experience to have with this album, to just really try to hone in on everything he's saying. Yeah, I don't know, man. It's really beautiful. There's certain moments, like very small things, like just beats coming in on certain tracks, or like certain things that he kind of like samples back and repeats himself saying, or a track near the end that features both of his parents speaking, his father reciting a poem. His father, recently deceased, was a very critically acclaimed poet. His mom speaking at what sounds like her birthday or something, making like a little toast and speech to her family and friends that were gathered there. The juxtaposition between those things, it's genius. It's genius, and it's extremely moving. And all of the cleverness and all of the innovation and stuff, just underscore. They don't distract at all from the sheer emotional quality and this kind of feeling of intimacy and emotional connection that you get from listening to it. Oh man, oh, it's so good. The closing track, the instrumental piece Riot, which I believe heavily samples music by his uncle, just has this wonderful sense of celebration. It's kind of wistful, it's kind of nostalgic, it feels like it's already moved past you once you hear it. But it's like life, you know? What a thing to say. But it's a healthy amount of sentimentality. It's a healthy amount of sadness. It's not living in a world of darkness anymore, but living in the real world and moving through it in a way that is uniquely your own, and really beautiful stuff. Okay, what could possibly top that? Well, it's similar in a lot of ways. It's another story of kind of emerging from darkness, emerging from painful times, which we've seen in quite a few of our top 5 here. So you can tell it's something that really resonates with me a lot when I see an artist make a triumphant creative statement after long periods of suffering. This one is sort of different in that the artist's response to suffering was immediately to create. You might as well just, I don't know why I'm trying to build up this contrast without showing you the album. The album is Now Only by Mount Eerie. So Mount Eerie, formerly known as the Microphones, real name Phil Elvium, is a musician I've liked for quite a long time. I like all of his work going way back to the earliest things he's recorded. All of it has always been very brutally sad, largely about death, about suffering, about kind of the tragedy of interpersonal relationships. But his most recent work is sad in like a whole new dimension. So he was married and had a daughter, and then his wife died of cancer a couple years ago. Last year he put out A Crow Looked at Me, which was written pretty much immediately after his wife died. He started putting down his feelings into songs, and it's like very immediate, intimate, grief-stricken moments in his life that he's been able to express in music. It is extremely sad, extremely moving, extremely beautiful. This I like even better though. Now it's like a year or so later, and he's still writing about his wife. He's still writing about his loss. He's still writing about the feelings he has and the sadness. But it's been a year, and he's honest about it. And he's talking about how his life has moved on in many ways, about all the things he's done since, about how it feels to be doing those things without her. And in these songs, you can feel the overwhelmingness of the sadness, the obsessive sadness, start to fade, and naturally, like humbly, without trying to make some grand thesis of it, without trying to turn it into life advice, you can see how it really happens to move on from such grief. It's really, really beautiful to kind of feel him expose himself to the world again and to kind of take things in again. And all of it is tinged, of course, with the memory of his wife. And yeah, man, I don't know. He was heavily inspired by Sun Kill Moon, who has been doing this sort of almost hypergraphic auto-fiction songwriting for quite a few years now. Ever since the success of Benji, he's just been pretty steadily putting out albums where all of the songs are just stories about things that happened to him recently, or tangents involving his memory and such. And they've been good. I've liked them generally, but it definitely kind of feels like he's running out of things to say. But Phil, on the other hand, of course, is in one of the major turning points of his life, is in a moment of a brand new emotional world in a terrible, terrible way, in a terrible circumstance. And this sort of diary writing that he's using to come to grips with it is extremely compelling and extremely relatable in some ways. And there's like kind of a mutual compassion that you feel where Phil is writing about his own suffering, knowing that it resonates with so many people, knowing and acknowledging in this album that he is still a popular musician, a critically acclaimed musician, and thus is speaking with compassion to you, the listener, saying, if not in so many words, like, this is the suffering we're all going to go through. Like, death is going to come to everyone we love. Like, let's get through it together. Like, let's not turn away from these feelings. Let's not pretend it isn't happening. But together, let's make something of this. He also is a big fan of Nosgard, the Norwegian author that I talked about at length in my books video. who also did a major project of autofiction, of writing about his own life. And sort of the fractal way that Phil tells stories on this album really reminds me of my favorite moments in Nosgard. The moments in Nosgard that really make me swoon, where he just and this is something that people attribute to Proust, and that makes me really want to read Proust. Is the idea of just sort of like automatic memory, that a chain of sensations will pull you further and further back into the nostalgic past until you're looking at like a whole column of stories and their related emotions. And um, the way that the album cover reflects it really beautifully, that Phil almost feels like he's just kind of looking around his room, his house, looking at things that they've pinned to their fridge or stuck with magnets. That's how fridges work. And like using those as points of inspiration to reminisce, to mourn. Oh, man. And the music is so gorgeous too. The thing that I think he likes best about Sun Kill Moon is also the thing I like best about Sun Kill Moon, which is kind of the transitions, the moments where it suddenly feels like the song is like exhaling after the build up, or that beyond exhaling, it just now is totally at still and at peace. Just these moments of like relief and then tension, not really built up in that sort of cinematic way I was talking about before, but just sort of in a really kind of organic, this is the way that feelings really are. You work yourself up, you get really sad, but then eventually it fades, and then you realize before you know it that things are kind of normal again. Yeah, I don't know, man. It's one hell of an album. It's like, I had a hard time putting this on the list. At first it was like down here somewhere. I think maybe it was between these two. Maybe it was even earlier for a bit. Because, I don't know, I like it a lot, but it's just like, I don't listen to it that often, because it makes me really sad. So that's really my favorite. And then I was like, no, there's only really one spot that makes sense for this album. There's nothing else this year that made me feel this hard. Just saying a lot, given everything I've said about these other ones. It's a part. Nah, I can't even start talking about parts. I don't know. Jeez. Oh, it's so good. I wonder what I'm curious now. I've been doing lists of albums for like over 10 years now. I skipped a few years, but there's probably been about 10 that I've made total. I wonder what percentage, what the ratio is between happy albums being number one and sad albums being number one. Should figure that out. Oh man. Okay. All right. Well, that's it. That's the albums of 2018 that I really liked. I was very happy with this year in music. I didn't listen to as much music as I wanted to, but of course I'm always gonna feel like that. I got new headphones, so I like music even more now because they're really nice headphones. Um, I don't know. I'm always gonna love music. The day that where I look back at the year of music and can't find an abundance of albums that I want to talk about, that I want to share with people, it's gonna be a scary day. I often hear about this sensation of getting too old for music, not really liking popular music anymore, having a hard time finding artists you like. And it's like, man, that better never happen to me. That would be so scary. I haven't felt like that at all, though. Every year, I'm just so eager to see what's new, what sort of thing I haven't heard before, what sort of thing did I not even know that I wanted. You know? You know? Yeah. Nah. All right. Bye bye.